Welcome back, dear listener. Tonight, we're delving into the darkest chapter of the 5 Nights at Freddy's saga, The Missing Children Incident, that forever transformed innocent entertainment into mechanical horror. This is the complete chronicle of the tragedy that birthed the haunted animatronics, the event that turned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza from a place of joy into a nexus of supernatural terror. We'll explore every aspect of this pivotal moment, the 5 children who vanished, the man who took them, the cover-up that followed, and, most importantly, how their souls became bound to the very characters meant to bring happiness. This isn't just a story of murder, but of transformation, of innocence corrupted, of spirits trapped between worlds, forever seeking justice or revenge or simply understanding of what happened to them. So, dim your lights, settle into your covers, and let this tale of lost children and the terrible price of trust guide you toward rest. The whispers you might hear are just the wind through windows. The shadows that might move are merely dreams beginning to form. Feel free to leave a like if these dark chronicles help you find sleep, and share in the comments what draws you to this particular tragedy. Let us begin our exploration of the missing children incident. The setting: Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, 1985. To understand the missing children incident, we must first understand the world in which it occurred. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1985 was at the height of its popularity, a crown jewel in the Fazbear entertainment empire. Located in a bustling suburban shopping district, the restaurant drew hundreds of families each week, all seeking the magic of animatronic entertainment and the simple pleasure of pizza and games. The building itself was expansive, designed to accommodate large birthday parties and weekend crowds. The main dining area could seat over 200 guests, with clear sightlines to the show stage, where Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica performed their programmed routines every hour. Pirates Cove, a separate small stage area, housed Foxy, whose performances were less frequent but highly anticipated by children who loved the Pirate Fox's adventurous tales. The layout of the restaurant would prove crucial to what happened. Beyond the public areas were numerous backroom storage areas, maintenance closets, employee break rooms, and, most importantly, the parts service room where spare animatronic parts and costumes were kept. These areas were supposedly off-limits to customers, but the barriers between public and private spaces were often more suggestion than enforcement. Security in 1985 was minimal by modern standards. There were cameras, but they were few and their coverage was incomplete. The blind spots would later be identified as critical failures, areas where someone familiar with the building could move unseen. The cameras that did exist were low resolution, black and white, and recorded on tapes that were regularly reused to save money, destroying potential evidence before anyone knew evidence was needed. The staff at this location consisted of about 20 employees at any given time: cooks, servers, janitors, and a few technicians who maintained the animatronics. There was also typically 1 or 2 security guards, though during busy daylight hours, security often meant simply keeping children from climbing on stage or entering restricted areas. The idea that someone would use the restaurant as a hunting ground for children was so far from anyone's mind that precautions against such evil simply didn't exist. The restaurant's atmosphere in 1985 was one of innocent joy. Parents trusted the establishment completely. It was a safe space where children could run around, play arcade games, and watch shows, while adults relaxed and socialized. Birthday parties were the restaurant's specialty, with special packages that included cake, tokens for games, and a special visit from Freddy himself to the birthday child's table. The man behind the mask, William Afton. William Afton, in 1985, was a man of contradictions. To the public, he was a successful businessman, co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment, a pillar of the community who had helped create beloved childhood memories for thousands of children. He was known to occasionally visit the restaurants, checking on operations, always professional, always controlled. But beneath this respectable exterior, Afton harbored darkness that had been growing for years. The exact origins of his pathology remain debated. Was he always a predator waiting for opportunity? Or did something in the creation and operation of the animatronics awaken something within him? What we know is that by 1985, he had already committed at least one murder. Charlotte Emily, daughter of his business partner Henry, killed outside of Freddy's location years earlier. Afton's knowledge of the restaurants was encyclopedic. He knew every layout, every camera angle, every blind spot. He had helped design many of the security systems, which meant he also knew their weaknesses. He understood the patterns of staff, the times when certain areas would be unmonitored, the ways someone could move through the building without arousing suspicion. Most crucially, Afton had access to something no other potential predator would have: the spring Bonnie suit. This golden rabbit costume was a relic from the earlier days of Fredbear's family diner. A spring-lock suit that could function as both an animatronic and a wearable costume. It had been retired from regular use due to safety concerns, but was still kept at various locations for special occasions or emergencies. Afton understood child psychology in a way that was both brilliant and terrifying. He knew that children who were taught to trust the animatronic characters would naturally trust someone wearing one of those character suits. The Spring Bonnie costume transformed him from a potentially suspicious adult into a beloved character, someone children would follow without question. His motivations remain one of the most debated aspects of the case. Was he driven by sadistic pleasure? Was he conducting some sort of experiment related to consciousness and death? Some theorists suggest he had discovered something about the nature of soul energy, remnant as it would later be called, and needed to create specific conditions of death to harvest it. Others believe he was simply a monster who had found the perfect hunting method. June 26, 1985, the day everything changed. The date of June 26, 1985, has become infamous in the FNAF timeline, though like many aspects of the incident, even this date is subject to some debate. What we know is that it was a Thursday, a typically busy day at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, with several birthday parties scheduled and a steady stream of families taking advantage of summer vacation. The weather was warm but not oppressive, the kind of perfect summer day that drew families out for activities. The restaurant opened at 10 a.m. as usual, with employees arriving an hour earlier to prepare. The animatronics were powered up and tested, their servo motors whirring to life, eyes brightening as their systems initialized. Everything appeared normal. William Afton arrived at the restaurant around noon, which wasn't unusual. As co-owner, his presence raised no alarms. He chatted with the manager, inspected some equipment, and was seen in various parts of the restaurant throughout the early afternoon. Witnesses would later recall nothing suspicious about his behavior. He was the same professional, slightly distant figure he always was. The lunch rush was particularly intense that day. 3 birthday parties were happening simultaneously, filling the dining room with excited children and overwhelmed parents. The noise level was tremendous: children laughing, arcade machines dinging, animatronics singing, parents trying to maintain conversations over the chaos. It was the perfect environment for someone to operate without drawing attention. At approximately 2 p.m., the Spring Bonnie costume was removed from the backstage area. Security footage that might have shown who took it was mysteriously corrupted, showing only static during the crucial minutes. The costume's absence wasn't immediately noticed, it wasn't part of the regular show rotation, and staff had no reason to check on it during the busy afternoon. The children, 5 lives cut short. Before we discuss their disappearance, we must acknowledge who these children were: not just victims, but individuals with names, personalities, dreams, and families who loved them. Gabriel Morrison, age 6, was a shy boy who loved Freddy Fazbear more than any other character. He would stand transfixed during Freddy's performances, mouthing along to every song, mimicking every gesture. His parents described him as quiet but imaginative, the kind of child who created elaborate stories with his toys. He was at the restaurant that day for a classmate's birthday party, wearing his favorite shirt with Freddy's face printed on it. Jeremy Fitzgerald, not to be confused with the later security guard of the same name, age 7, was energetic and outgoing, always the first to volunteer for activities, always ready with a joke. He particularly loved Bonnie, often pretending to play air guitar along with the animatronic rabbit. His parents had dropped him off for a friend's party, planning to pick him up at 4 p.m. Susie Williams, age 5, was the youngest of the 5. She was described as trusting and sweet, the kind of child who believed the best of everyone. She had recently lost her dog, and her parents had brought her to Freddy's hoping to cheer her up. She was fascinated by Chica and her cupcake, often telling people that Chica was her best friend. Fritz Smith, age 7, was adventurous and fearless, always pushing boundaries and exploring places he shouldn't. He idolized Foxy, wearing a makeshift pirate hat he'd made from newspaper and carrying a cardboard sword. His parents noted he had a tendency to wander off, following interesting sights or sounds without thinking of danger. Cassidy Andrews, age 8, remains the most mysterious of the 5. Descriptions of Cassidy vary, with some accounts referring to them as a girl, others as a boy, as if their very identity has been obscured by the tragedy. What's consistent is that Cassidy was intense, watchful, and unusually perceptive for their age. They seemed to see through the cheerful facade of the restaurant to something darker beneath. The disappearances. The exact sequence of the children's disappearances remains partially reconstructed from witness testimonies, security footage, and later investigations. What we know is that between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., all 5 children vanished from the main area of the restaurant without any immediate alarm being raised. Gabriel was the first. Security footage showed him standing near the stage, watching Freddy perform, when a figure in the Spring Bonnie suit approached him. The figure can be seen gesturing, apparently speaking to Gabriel, who initially seemed hesitant. Then Spring Bonnie gestured toward the back area, possibly mentioning something about seeing where Freddy got ready for shows, or perhaps offering a special birthday surprise. Gabriel followed, his last recorded image showing him walking trustingly beside the golden rabbit toward a door marked Employees Only. Jeremy disappeared approximately 20 minutes later. He had been playing in the arcade when Spring Bonnie appeared. Witnesses later recalled seeing Jeremy talking animatedly to the character, clearly excited about something. One child reported that Spring Bonnie had promised to show Jeremy Bonnie's special guitar, though this testimony was dismissed at the time as childhood imagination. Susie's disappearance was perhaps the cruelest in its deception. The person in the Spring Bonnie suit apparently told her that her recently deceased dog was alive and waiting for her in the back room. Multiple children overheard parts of this conversation, though none thought it strange at the time. Spring Bonnie was a trusted character, and children's understanding of death is often fluid. Susie followed eagerly, hope lighting up her face as she disappeared into the restricted areas. Fritz vanished while his parents were distracted by a commotion in another part of the restaurant. He had been watching Foxy's performance when Spring Bonnie approached. Given Fritz's adventurous nature, it likely took little convincing to get him to follow. One employee thought they saw Fritz heading toward the backstage area but assumed he was with a parent and didn't intervene. Cassidy's disappearance was the last and perhaps the most disturbing. Unlike the others, Cassidy seemed to initially resist Spring Bonnie's invitation. Security footage showed what appeared to be a longer conversation, with Cassidy backing away at one point. But eventually, they too followed the golden rabbit. Some theorists believe Cassidy suspected something was wrong but followed anyway, perhaps trying to protect the other children or investigate what was happening. The safe room, where innocents died. The location where William Afton took the children was what Fazbear Entertainment referred to as a safe room, and bitter irony given what occurred there. These rooms were designed as emergency shelters, places where employees could retreat in case of fire or other disasters. They were also used for storage of sensitive equipment, and, crucially, were not visible on the digital map provided to animatronics and were blind spots for security cameras. The safe room at this location was accessed through a hallway behind the main stage, through a door that looked like any other storage closet from the outside. Inside was a space roughly 15 feet by 15 feet, with concrete walls that muffled sound, ventilation that could be sealed, and a single dim light bulb that cast harsh shadows. What exactly happened in that room remains partially speculation, as William Afton never confessed and the children could not testify. But forensic evidence and later paranormal manifestations provide some clues. The children were likely killed quickly. Afton couldn't risk prolonged screams that might penetrate even the muffled walls. The method appears to have been strangulation or sharp force trauma, though the bodies were never officially recovered in a recognizable state. What Afton did next reveals either brilliant criminal planning or desperate improvisation. Rather than attempt to remove the bodies from the restaurant, which would have required passing through public areas and risked discovery, he chose to hide them in the one place no one would think to look inside the animatronics themselves. The animatronic suits, while appearing solid from the outside, contained significant hollow space within their torsos and limbs to accommodate the complex endoskeleton mechanisms. By partially removing some non-essential components, Afton created enough space to conceal small bodies. He stuffed each child into a different animatronic. Gabriel into Freddy, Jeremy into Bonnie, Susie into Chica, Fritz into Foxy, and Cassidy. Cassidy's placement remains disputed, with some believing they were placed in Golden Freddy, a suit that shouldn't have been at that location. The immediate aftermath. The first signs that something was wrong came as the afternoon birthday parties began to wind down. Parents arrived to pick up their children and couldn't find them. Initial reactions were more annoyed than alarmed. Children wandering off in the restaurant was common, hiding in the playground tubes or becoming engrossed in arcade games. But as searches became more frantic and systematic, covering every accessible area of the restaurant, concern transformed into panic. 5 children were missing. 5 children whose parents insisted they would never leave the restaurant voluntarily. 5 children who had simply vanished. The police were called around 4:30 p.m. The restaurant was immediately closed, customers were evacuated, and a systematic search began. Every room, every closet, every space large enough to hold a child was examined. The animatronics were checked, but only superficially. Officers looked inside the mouths and obvious openings but didn't think to partially disassemble the complex mechanisms. William Afton was present during the search, playing the concerned co-owner perfectly. He helped coordinate with police, provided access to all areas, and expressed appropriate shock and concern. One officer later recalled that Afton had been particularly helpful, suggesting search areas and providing keys to locked rooms, a behavior that in retrospect seemed like someone enjoying their ability to misdirect the investigation. The security footage was reviewed, but crucial sections were missing or corrupted. The cameras showed the children in the main area, showed them playing and enjoying themselves, but the moments of their disappearances were frustratingly unclear. The spring Bonnie suit was noted moving through the restaurant, but the assumption was that it was an employee entertaining children, a normal occurrence that raised no immediate suspicions. The investigation. The investigation into the missing children became one of the largest in the state's history. Federal agents were brought in, assuming a kidnapping scenario. The restaurant remained closed for 2 weeks as forensic teams went over every inch, collecting fingerprints, fibers, and other evidence that would ultimately lead nowhere. The animatronics were examined more thoroughly during this period, but by then, decomposition and the heat generated by the mechanisms had begun to destroy physical evidence. Investigators noted unusual odors and some fluid staining, but attributed these to mechanical lubricants and normal wear. Thus, the possibility that bodies were hidden within the suits was considered so outlandish that it was never seriously investigated. Employees were interviewed extensively. Several mentioned that the spring Bonnie suit had been active that day, but no one could definitively identify who had been wearing it. The costume had been returned to its storage area, apparently cleaned, showing no obvious signs of violence. When questioned, William Afton admitted the suit had been used, but claimed he couldn't determine which employee had worn it. Staff often didn't log such usage properly. The parents of the missing children were subjected to intense scrutiny, as statistics suggested family involvement in most child disappearances. But all were quickly cleared they had solid alibis, no motives, and were genuinely devastated by their losses. The randomness of the victims also suggested a stranger abduction, though the fact that all 5 children disappeared from the same location on the same day defied typical patterns. A massive search of the surrounding area was conducted. Woods were combed, lakes were dragged, abandoned buildings were searched. Volunteers by the hundreds joined the effort, desperate to find any trace of the children. But nothing was found, no clothing, no bodies, no evidence they had ever left the restaurant. The cover-up begins. As days turned into weeks with no progress, Fazbear Entertainment began to shift from cooperation to damage control. The company faced potential bankruptcy from lawsuits, loss of customer trust, and the ongoing closure of one of their flagship locations. The decision was made at the highest levels to minimize the incident and resume operations as quickly as possible. The restaurant reopened after 3 weeks, with enhanced security measures that were more theatrical than effective. New cameras were installed, though they still had blind spots. A security guard was stationed in the main dining room during operating hours. Parents were required to sign children in and out. These measures reassured some families, though many refused to ever return. But almost immediately, staff began reporting strange occurrences. The animatronics, which had always been slightly unnerving in their movements, seemed different. They would turn their heads to track specific individuals. Their programmed routines would sometimes include movements or sounds that weren't in their coding. Most disturbingly, a foul odor began to emanate from the characters, particularly on warm days. Fazbear Entertainment's response was swift and focused on suppression rather than investigation. Employees who reported unusual occurrences were transferred or terminated. Families who complained about disturbing experiences were offered free meals and merchandise in exchange for silence. When local news attempted to investigate ongoing concerns, they were met with legal threats and advertising boycotts that quickly ended their interest. Internal memos from this period, discovered years later, revealed that upper management was aware of the anomalies, but chose to interpret them as mechanical malfunctions rather than anything more sinister. The cost of completely replacing the animatronics was deemed excessive, especially when the restaurant was already operating at a loss due to decreased attendance. The puppet's gift unknown to anyone at the time, something extraordinary and terrible was happening within the restaurant after closing hours. The puppet, an animatronic that had been possessed by Charlotte Emily's spirit years earlier, had sensed the presence of the murdered children's souls. These spirits, traumatized and confused, were tethered to the location of their deaths, unable to move on but also unable to fully manifest. Security footage that was discovered and subsequently destroyed showed the puppet engaging in what can only be described as a ritual. Over the course of several nights, the puppet was recorded approaching each of the animatronics in turn. It would stand before them, its arms raised in an almost blessing-like gesture, and something visible only as a slight distortion on the old cameras would pass between them. The puppet was giving the children a gift, or perhaps a curse. It was facilitating their possession of the animatronics, binding their souls to the mechanical bodies that contained their physical remains. whether this was an act of mercy, giving them a form of continued existence, or an act of vengeance, enabling them to seek justice, remains unknown. Perhaps it was both. Each child's soul found itself merged with the character they had loved or identified with in life. Gabrielle, who had adored Freddy, became one with the bear, his consciousness spreading through circuits and servos. Jeremy merged with Bonnie, Susie with Chica, Fritz with Foxy. Cassidy's binding was more complex, their spirit seeming to inhabit multiple forms or perhaps something beyond physical form entirely. The process wasn't immediate or smooth. For days, the animatronics would twitch and spasm during off hours, as if something was learning to control them. Employees reported hearing sounds from the main dining room at night, not mechanical noises, but something that sounded almost like crying, like children calling for parents who would never come. The possessed performers. Once the possession was complete, the true horror of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza began. During the day, when the lights were bright and the restaurant was full of families, the animatronics maintained something close to their normal behavior. The children's spirits, perhaps soothed by the familiar environment of joy and play, remained relatively dormant. But at night, when the restaurant closed and darkness crept in, the children's consciousness would fully surface. They were confused, angry, and in pain, not physical pain, but the existential agony of being dead yet aware, trapped in bodies that weren't truly bodies, unable to communicate their plight or understand what had happened to them. Night security guards began reporting increasingly disturbing encounters. The animatronics would leave the stage, moving through the restaurant with purpose that defied their programming. They seemed to be searching for something or someone. When they encountered adults, particularly security guards in uniform, they would become aggressive, attempting to grab them, to stuff them into spare animatronic suits as they themselves had been stuffed. The children couldn't distinguish between their killer and any other adult in the darkness. The uniform, the hat, the badge, these became triggers for their trauma. Every guard became William Afton in their confused perception. Every night became an opportunity for the vengeance they couldn't consciously understand they were seeking. The first security guard to die was found the morning after his third shift, his body compressed into a spare Freddy suit in the backstage area. The official report listed it as a workplace accident, suggesting he had been attempting to wear the suit and had triggered the spring lock mechanisms. The family received a substantial settlement in exchange for their silence and agreement not to pursue further investigation. Living with the dead. As 1985 turned to 1986, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had become a location where two realities existed simultaneously. During the day, it was still a children's restaurant, though one with decreasing attendance and an increasingly dark reputation. Parents whispered about the missing children, about strange smells and sounds, about their children reporting that the animatronics had spoken to them with voices that weren't part of the show. At night, it was a hunting ground where confused spirits in mechanical bodies stalked anyone unfortunate enough to be locked inside with them. The company's solution was to hire security guards at minimum wage, give them minimal training, and hope they survived until 6 a.m. The turnover rate was extraordinary, with most guards lasting only a night or two before either being killed or fleeing, and never returning. Phone Guy, a long-term employee who recorded training messages for new guards, tried to rationalize the situation. He created elaborate explanations for the animatronics' behavior they were in. Free roaming mode to keep their servos from locking up. They saw humans as endoskeletons without costumes and tried to correct the situation. These explanations were obviously false, but they provided a veneer of normalcy that allowed operations to continue. The children's families never gave up searching for answers. They formed support groups, hired private investigators, and pressured law enforcement to continue investigating. But without bodies, without evidence, without any leads, the cases grew cold. The families were left in a terrible limbo, unable to mourn properly, unable to move on, always hoping their children might somehow still be alive. Some parents reported strange experiences, dreams where their children spoke to them, saying they were scared, that it was dark, that they couldn't get out. Phone calls where they heard breathing but no words. Calls that traced back to the restaurant. Fleeting glimpses of their children near Freddy's, always at the edge of vision, always disappearing when approached. The bite of 87 and aftermath. The situation at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza couldn't remain hidden forever. In 1987, at a newly opened location with new toy animatronics, an incident occurred that became known as the Bite of 87. While not directly related to the original missing children, this event brought renewed scrutiny to Fazbear Entertainment and their history of tragedies. The toy animatronics had been designed with advanced facial recognition software, supposedly able to identify potential threats to children. But something in their programming had become corrupted, whether by supernatural influence from the original possessed animatronics, whose parts had been used in the new models, or by deliberate sabotage causing them to become increasingly aggressive. The bite itself, where an animatronic bit off the frontal lobe of a day shift employee, was impossible to cover up. It happened in full view of children and parents, in broad daylight, captured on multiple cameras. The victim survived but was permanently disabled, and the incident made national news. This brought journalists investigating Fazbear Entertainment's history, including the 1985 missing children. Connections were drawn between the incidents, patterns were identified, and questions were raised about why the company had been allowed to continue operating after such tragedies. But Fazbear Entertainment's legal team was formidable, and their political connections ran deep. They managed to frame each incident as isolated, unconnected tragedies. They settled lawsuits out of court, buried investigations in bureaucratic red tape, and continued operations under different names and at different locations. William Afton's return years passed, and the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location was eventually closed, the building abandoned but not demolished. The animatronics were left to decay, their possessed forms trapped in an empty restaurant with no purpose, no audience, no hope of release. But William Afton couldn't stay away. Whether driven by guilt, curiosity, or a desire to cover his tracks more thoroughly, he returned to the abandoned restaurant years later. Using his knowledge of the building's layout, he entered through a service entrance that had been sealed but not properly secured. What he found inside was a monument to decay and supernatural horror. The animatronics, weathered by years of abandonment, were still active in their way. They moved through the empty restaurant, following routines that had become corrupted by time and spiritual decay. They were more aggressive than ever, their programming completely overwritten by the rage of the spirits within. Afton had come prepared, or so he thought. He used techniques he'd learned over the years to temporarily disable the animatronics, dismantling them one by one to prevent them from attacking him. But in destroying their physical forms, he made a crucial error. He freed the spirits from their mechanical prisons without giving them anywhere else to go. The souls of the 5 children, finally released from the animatronics but still tethered to the location of their deaths, manifested as spectral forms. For the first time since their murders, they could confront their killer directly. Afton could see them, these ghostly children, their eyes accusing, their presence overwhelming. In panic, Afton fled to the safe room where he had killed them years before. Desperately, he donned the spring Bonnie suit that had been his instrument of murder, believing it would protect him as it had before. But the suit was old, damaged by years of neglect, and the safe room's leaking ceiling had created a humid environment that was deadly for spring lock mechanisms. The children's spirits surrounded him, their mere presence seeming to trigger the suit's failure. The spring locks released all at once, driving metal and springs through Afton's body, creating wounds that should have been immediately fatal. But something, whether the spirit's desire for him to suffer or something supernatural about the suit itself, kept him alive, conscious and in agony. The children's fate. With their killer trapped in his own instrument of murder, the children's spirits faced a crossroads. They had achieved a form of vengeance, but it brought no peace. They remained bound to the restaurant, unable to move on, their trauma and confusion unresolved. Some spirits seemed to fade over time, perhaps finding peace in Afton's suffering, or simply exhausting their spiritual energy. But others remained, particularly Cassidy, whose rage seemed inexhaustible. Cassidy's spirit, more than any other, seemed determined to ensure Afton's consciousness remained aware of his torment, creating a personalized hell where he would experience the fear and pain he had inflicted magnified infinitely. The restaurant was eventually sealed, with Afton's dying but somehow still conscious form trapped in the safe room. But the children's influence had spread beyond that single location. Their story, their trauma, their need for justice had infected the very concept of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Every new location seemed to carry echoes of their presence. Every new animatronic seemed susceptible to their influence. Legacy of the Missing Children. The Missing Children incident became the dark heart of the FNAF universe, the original sin from which all other horrors sprouted. Every subsequent tragedy, every new manifestation of supernatural threat, could trace its roots back to those 5 children and what was done to them. Their influence extended beyond the physical into the digital. When Fazbear Entertainment attempted to create virtual reality experiences decades later, scanning old circuit boards for authentic movement data, they unknowingly copied fragments of the children's consciousness into digital form. The children's trauma, their confusion, their rage, all became part of the code, creating glitches that were more than technical malfunctions. In the modern era, as Fazbear Entertainment tried to monetize their own dark history through games and experiences, they were essentially profiting from the children's suffering. Every jump scare in every game was an echo of real terror. Every animatronic character a reminder of actual possessed beings. Every player a participant in perpetuating the children's story. The families of the missing children never found closure. They aged, some dying without ever knowing what happened to their sons and daughters. Support groups formed for families of missing children, with the Freddy's Five becoming infamous examples of unsolved disappearances. Books were written, documentaries were made, conspiracy theories proliferated, but the truth was somehow both simpler and more horrible than anyone imagined. The psychological impact. The missing children incident left psychological scars that extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. Every child who had attended Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1985 carried some trauma from the experience. Those who had seen the children disappear, who had witnessed Spring Bonnie leading them away, dealt with survivors' guilt and questions about why they hadn't been chosen. Children who had played with Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, or Cassidy that day reported nightmares for years afterward. They dreamed of their friends calling for help from inside the animatronics, of golden rabbits that promised wonderful surprises but delivered only darkness, of birthday parties that never ended because the guests couldn't leave. The employees who had worked that day struggled with their own guilt. Should they have noticed something wrong? Should they have questioned the Spring Bonnie suit's activities? Many quit not just their jobs, but any work involving children, unable to bear the responsibility they felt they had failed. Even William Afton's family was destroyed by his actions. His wife disappeared from records, possibly fleeing to escape the shame. His daughter Elizabeth would later die in an incident involving animatronics he had designed. His son Michael would spend his life trying to undo his father's damage, ultimately sacrificing himself in the process. The Afton family line ended in tragedy, all stemming from William's actions on that June day. The supernatural rules. The missing children incident established certain supernatural rules that would govern the FNAF universe. Violent death in proximity to animatronics could result in possession. Sufficient emotional trauma could bind a soul to a physical location. Consciousness could persist and even transfer between physical and digital forms. The concept of remnant, a substance or energy created through suffering that could animate the inanimate, seemed to have been discovered or created through the missing children's deaths. William Afton's later experiments would focus on harvesting and utilizing remnant, suggesting he had learned something from his murders beyond simple sadism. The children's spirits demonstrated abilities that defied conventional understanding. They could manipulate electronics, appear in dreams, influence probability, and even affect the physical health of those who encountered them. Security guards reported nosebleeds, headaches, and even heart problems that corresponded to proximity to the possessed animatronics. There seemed to be rules governing when and how the spirits could manifest. Darkness enhanced their power. Certain triggers uniforms, adult males, specific times of night would cause increased activity. Playing audio of their favorite songs would sometimes calm them, while attempts to dismantle or destroy the animatronics would send them into frenzies. The cultural shadow beyond the immediate tragedy. The missing children incident cast a long cultural shadow. It changed how society viewed children's entertainment venues, how parents thought about safety, how communities responded to missing children cases. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza became synonymous with danger hidden behind cheerful facades. The incident inspired countless urban legends, each more elaborate than the last. Stories of children who attended birthday parties at Freddy's and were never quite the same afterward. Tales of animatronics seen walking through neighborhoods at night, searching for something or someone. Reports of the Toreador March playing from empty buildings where Freddy's locations once stood. Law enforcement agencies studied the case as an example of how predators could use trusted positions and familiar characters to lure victims. The Spring Bonnie Protocol became informal training about how costumes and uniforms could be used to manipulate children's trust. Child safety programs began warning about the danger of following anyone, even beloved characters, into restricted areas. The entertainment industry as a whole was affected. Other restaurant chains with animatronic characters saw dramatic decreases in attendance. Several competitors to Fazbear Entertainment closed entirely, unable to overcome the association with mechanical performers. The era of animatronic entertainment, which had seemed so promising, effectively ended with the missing children. Modern revelations. As technology advanced and old records were digitized, new information about the missing children incident occasionally surfaced. Leaked documents from Fazbear Entertainment revealed they had known about the bodies in the animatronics much earlier than previously believed. Internal memos discussed biological contamination and unusual preservation in terms that suggested full awareness of what had happened. Former employees, protected by statute of limitations or approaching death, began sharing their stories. A janitor revealed he had seen blood seeping from Freddy's joints, but had been threatened into silence. A technician admitted to finding human tissue while performing maintenance, but was told it was synthetic material and ordered to ignore it. Digital archaeology. The process of recovering data from old, damaged systems revealed fragments of security footage thought destroyed. These clips, while degraded, showed more of Spring Bonnie's movements that day, showed children following willingly, showed the last moments of innocence before everything changed. The families of the missing children, those still alive, formed a foundation dedicated to child safety and missing persons cases. They channeled their grief into advocacy, pushing for legislation requiring better security in children's venues, more thorough background checks for employees, and faster responses to missing children reports. The ongoing mystery. Despite everything we know about the missing children incident, mysteries remain. Why did William Afton choose those 5 specific children? Was there something special about them that drew his attention, or were they simply convenient victims? Some theorists believe he was looking for specific qualities, psychic sensitivity, strong emotional attachments to the animatronics, or other factors that would ensure successful possession. The exact mechanism of possession remains unexplained. How did the puppet facilitate the binding of souls to animatronics? Was this an ability Charlotte Emily possessed in life, or something she gained through her own possession? Could the process be replicated? And if so, has it been? Cassidy's unique status among the missing children raises questions. Why did their spirit seem more powerful, more aware, more capable of influencing events? Some believe Cassidy didn't die immediately like the others, that extended suffering created a different kind of spiritual energy. Others theorize that Cassidy possessed latent psychic abilities that were amplified by death. The golden Freddy entity, which Cassidy is often associated with, defies explanation. It appears and disappears without following physical laws, can manifest in multiple locations simultaneously, and seems to exist more as a projection than a physical animatronic. Is this what happens when a spirit isn't properly bound to a single form? The philosophical implications. The missing children incident raises profound philosophical questions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence itself. If the children's consciousness persisted after death, what does this say about the nature of the soul? Are we more than our physical bodies? And if so, what determines where our consciousness goes when those bodies fail? The possessed animatronics challenge our understanding of what constitutes life. They show behaviors suggesting memory, emotion, learning, and purpose. Are they still the children in any meaningful sense, or have they become something new hybrid entities that are neither fully human nor fully machine? The question of justice is central to the narrative. The children achieved a form of vengeance by trapping William Afton, but did this bring them peace? Is justice possible when the victims are dead and the perpetrator is beyond normal legal reach? The supernatural justice they enacted might be satisfying narratively, but it didn't undo their deaths or reunite them with their families. The incident also questions the nature of innocence and its loss. The children were innocent when they followed Spring Bonnie, trusting in the goodness of a beloved character. Their innocence was destroyed not just by death, but by transformation into beings capable of murder themselves. Is innocence something that can be corrupted even after death? The economic aftermath. The missing children incident had profound economic impacts beyond just Fazbear Entertainment. The entire family entertainment industry saw decreased revenues as parents became more cautious about venues catering to children. Insurance rates for restaurants with animatronic characters increased dramatically, making such establishments economically unviable for many operators. Fazbear Entertainment itself, despite the tragedy, showed remarkable financial resilience. Through a combination of legal maneuvering, rebranding, and exploitation of their own dark history, they managed to continue operations for decades. This raises ethical questions about profiting from tragedy, about corporate responsibility, and about capitalism's ability to commodify even horror. The security industry saw increased demand following the incident. Companies specializing in child safety systems, tracking devices, and surveillance equipment experienced significant growth. The Freddy's effect became a marketing term for security companies, referencing parents' increased willingness to invest in child safety measures. Legal reforms following the incident created new industries around compliance and verification. Background check services expanded, specialized insurance products were developed, and consulting firms emerged to help entertainment venues manage risks associated with child customers. The technological response. The incident spurred technological development in several areas. Facial recognition systems, still primitive in 1985, received increased investment as companies sought ways to track children within their venues. RFID technology was adapted for child tracking, with bracelets and badges that could monitor location in real time. Animatronic design changed fundamentally after the incident. New models were designed to be transparent, with clear panels showing their mechanical interiors to prevent anything from being hidden inside. Some companies abandoned physical animatronics entirely, moving to projected or screen-based characters that couldn't possibly conceal bodies. The rise of digital entertainment as an alternative to physical venues was partially driven by parents' post-incident fears. Video games, home entertainment systems, and eventually online platforms benefited from parents' reluctance to take children to physical entertainment venues. The incident inadvertently accelerated the digital transformation of children's entertainment. Forensic technology also advanced in response to the case. New methods for detecting biological material, analyzing degraded evidence, and recovering data from damaged systems were developed by investigators frustrated by their inability to solve the case with existing tools. International impact. While the missing children incident occurred in the United States, its impact was global. International news coverage made Freddy Fazbear's Pizza infamous worldwide, affecting Fazbear Entertainment's expansion plans and influencing child safety protocols globally. Different cultures interpreted the incident through their own lenses. In Japan, it was seen as an example of Western neglect of spiritual matters, with some suggesting proper shrine blessings might have prevented the possession. European countries used it to justify stricter regulations on American-style entertainment franchises. Latin American countries incorporated it into existing folklore about dangerous spirits that prey on children. International law enforcement agencies studied the case for lessons about child predators operating in commercial settings. The Freddy Protocol became standard training in many countries, teaching officers to be suspicious of entertainment venues with unusual patterns of child interactions. The incident influenced international treaties on missing children, with faster information sharing between countries when children disappeared near entertainment venues. The Freddy 5 became a reference point for discussing the importance of international cooperation in missing children cases. The memorialization debate. How to memorialize the missing children became a contentious issue. Some wanted a public memorial to ensure they weren't forgotten, while others, including some family members, preferred private grief without constant public reminder. The site of the original restaurant became an unofficial shrine, with people leaving flowers, toys, and messages for the children. Fazbear Entertainment's attempts to control the narrative around memorialization were particularly controversial. They opposed official memorials while simultaneously referencing the incident obliquely in their entertainment products. This commercialization of tragedy led to protests and boycotts, though these had limited impact on the company's operations. Artists and writers created unauthorized tributes to the children, leading to legal battles over who had the right to tell their story. Fan communities developed elaborate mythologies around the children, sometimes conflicting with known facts, creating a parallel narrative that sometimes overshadowed the real tragedy. The question of how to remember child victims of violence without exploiting their memory remains unresolved. The missing children have become symbols, icons, and legends, but in the process, their individuality, Gabriel's shyness, Jeremy's energy, Susie's trust, Fritz's adventure-seeking, Cassidy's intensity risks being lost. Conclusion: The Eternal Night. As we reach the end of our exploration of the missing children incident, we're left with a tragedy that transcends simple crime and punishment. 5 children lost their lives, their innocence, and their peace. They became trapped between worlds, neither fully dead nor truly alive, seeking justice or vengeance or simply understanding. Their killer faced a supernatural punishment that might be considered fitting, trapped in his own instrument of murder, tormented by his victims for potentially eternity. But this resolution brought no comfort to grieving families, no closure to a community traumatized by loss, no real justice in any conventional sense. The incident birthed a mythology that has spread far beyond its origins, influencing popular culture, child safety protocols, and our understanding of how quickly innocence can be destroyed. Every animatronic character created since carries the shadow of the Freddy's 5. Every children's venue operates under protocols developed in response to their disappearance. The children themselves remain in a sense still missing. Their bodies were never properly recovered, their spirits never properly laid to rest. They exist now as legends, as cautionary tales, as digital ghosts in games and stories that perpetuate their trauma for entertainment. They are more famous in death than they ever could have been in life. But it's a fame they never sought and from which they can never benefit. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the missing children incident is how it reveals the vulnerability of innocence. The children followed Spring Bonnie because they had been taught to trust, to believe in the goodness of beloved characters, to seek joy and adventure. These positive qualities became the very things that led to their destruction. The incident forces us to confront the terrible necessity of teaching children suspicion, of destroying some innocence to preserve life itself. As you drift toward sleep, perhaps you'll think of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy not as horror story victims or vengeful spirits, but as children who should have grown up, who should have had futures, who should have been protected by the adults and systems meant to keep them safe. Their story reminds us that behind every horror tale are real losses, real grief, and real failures of the most fundamental duty any society has protecting its children. May they have found peace, wherever and whatever they are now. May their families have found whatever closure is possible after such loss. And may we remember them not just as victims or spirits or legends, but as 5 children who went to a pizza restaurant on a summer day in 1985 and never came home. Rest well, and in your dreams may all children be safe, all innocence be protected, and all animatronics be nothing more than mechanical entertainers, bringing joy without horror. Good night.